welcome. My name is Mari Hunter. I'm with the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency Parking and Curb Management Team. Again, this is the Northeast Mission Parking Management Project Community Meeting, and thank you all for joining this evening. We will be starting with a presentation discussing why we're here, what we're doing, and then the majority of the time will be for public comments and questions. And so we'll just dive in. Some of you may have been here long ago to be part of the original effort. It's about 10 years ago. Unfortunately, it did not produce a plan that was approved. And then I joined the parking team, and a few years ago, we restarted it, restarted the effort with much encouragement from many of the folks in the Northeast Mission. And we did a little data collection at the beginning to reaffirm what was identified 10 years ago, which was there was a lot more demand for parking than the area had supply. People have been driving around for 15, 20, 30 minutes to find a parking space, or they had to double park. And so we restarted the effort, and we wanted to take a slightly different approach. We had a blank slate. We have a few new regulations in our toolbox that I'll discuss in a moment. We have new opportunities to provide feedback. We certainly had community meetings and workshops, but we also have had an online survey and office hours, both of which were to be more flexible for various schedules, and so people could provide feedback at their convenience. We also created a working group. This was volunteer-based. People submitted applications to be part of a small group, members of the community, residents, business owners, people who work in the Northeast Mission, have volunteered a lot of their time and energy to review all of this feedback and generate a draft proposal. So I do want to identify those members and thank them for their time. Gabrielle, Monica, Angela, Gwen, Alfredo, John, Carla, Kieran, Jeremy, Leo, Leslie, and Eve. Thank you for your continued efforts, your patience, and driving this forward. So we started this a few years ago, and then there was a pandemic, and everything came to a stop for a couple of years. And I was reassigned to do pandemic specific work, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, the shared spaces parklets. But I've been able to re-engage in this project and have met with the working group a few times. And so this evening, I'm pleased to present that proposal and go into some of those details. So why manage parking? As I mentioned, there is a lot of demand, more demand than supply. And these demands range from parking, customers coming to businesses, residents, visitors, employees. We have loading, and that's commercial loading or freight loading, and passenger pickup and drop off. We have a lot of transit going through this neighborhood. And so we have bus stops that take up a lot of the curb space. We have bicycling infrastructure, so bike lanes that might be along the curb or bike share stations. And then this new opportunity, the shared spaces parklets, which allow businesses to take some of that curb space and expand their business footprint. Businesses took a huge hit during the pandemic. They were entirely shut down, and then they could only open little by little. And so this allows them to recover a little bit more. And with incredible weather almost year round, it's nice just to be outside. So it's a great use of this public right of way. The parking lane is public right of way, and so this is a great use for the public. But it does mean that with all these different demands, what remains for parking needs to be regulated. So we're all taking turns and sharing that curb space. And people are going to take turns differently, whether you're a resident or a visitor, an employee. And so you'll see in a moment, there are a wide range of regulations just to meet the very diverse needs of the Northeast Mission. So the next few slides are going to be discussing what I'm going to call baseline regulations. On top of that, we can layer in passenger loading, commercial loading, accessible parking, but these are just the baseline regulations. And so this first one is a standard time limit. And this applies to everyone. Even if you have a permit, a standard time limit applies to everyone. So all vehicles must move before that time limit expires. And this is usually 2 or 4 hours, depending on the block, and it operates Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. The next one, residential permit parking, is also a time limit, but if you have the residential permit, you are exempt from that time limit. So vehicles that don't have it must move after 2 hours. Or 4 hours, a slight exception that we have on a few blocks in the Northeast Mission. But again, if you have the permit, you're exempt from it. Again, it operates Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Then we have paid parking meters. And the image here is one of the new meters that are being installed across the city. And again, it's a standard parking meter, or if that's the regulation, a standard meter. All vehicles must pay. We typically don't have a time limit, with the exception of a few locations that have been flagged in the Northeast Mission. And that's because our data has found that people do not want to stay any longer than they have to. No one wants to pay for parking just because they can. If they just need to be there for an hour, they'll pay for an hour. If something requires a bit more time and they need to be there for 4, 5, 6 hours, they'll pay, and then they get out. And so now, when the meters don't have a time limit, it provides that flexibility. So again, with the exception of a few locations, the meters as proposed won't have a time limit. And those will operate Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And the rate will start at 50 cents an hour. Then we have pay or permit. And this is the new tool that was actually inspired by that effort 10 years ago. And it's an overlay of parking meters with residential permit parking. So vehicles without the permit will have to pay the meter. Those with the permit are exempt from payment. Again, these meters won't have a time limit. They will operate Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And again, the rate will start at 50 cents an hour. And now you see a very colorful draft proposal. Again, the Northeast Mission neighborhood is very dynamic. And so we have various regulations, not just block to block, but block face to block base. Literally across the street, this base layer regulation could be very different. And so what you're seeing is this orange color is a standard 4-hour time limit. Then we have the green is a 2-hour residential permit parking regulation. The yellow is special to the Northeast Mission as well because of the amount of PDR, or production, distribution, and repair. This is a 4-hour residential permit parking area. Then we have paid parking. and that's the blue. And then this pink color is that new overlay of parking meters and residential permit parking, that payer permit. So the thick dashed lines are the proposed regulations. The solid thin lines are existing regulations. So if there is overlap, it means that we would rescind the existing regulation and advance the proposed regulation. What you're not seeing on this map, again, just because these are base layer regulations, but they will be integrated, are things like loading. Certainly there are loading zones in the neighborhood already. Some of them are still very useful. Some of them may be old and not necessary anymore. So those are things we would look to remove and restore that to parking, for example. But we can layer in loading zones, again, commercial or freight loading or passenger loading. Accessible parking or blue zones will also be integrated, and daylighting. And daylighting is to improve safety at intersections. And I'll show an example of these things on the next slide. And then finally, the shared spaces or parklets are also part of this, but just not identified on this map. So these are the examples of those things that will be layered in. So in the top photo here, it's a commercial loading zone, which is painted yellow. On the right-hand side, upper right-hand side, there's a accessible parking space. Those are painted blue, and they are located next to accessible curb ramps. And then in the bottom is an example of daylighting. And what we do is put red curb right at the approach of an intersection, and that allows people on the road, whether it's someone in a vehicle or on a bicycle, to see pedestrians, and then pedestrians can see people coming down the road more easily, just to, again, improve safety at the intersection. A bit more detail about the parking meters. Again, there won't be a time limit unless we specify a location where we are really, really concerned about that turnover. They will operate Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And to make it as easy as possible, there are several payment options. We have parking cards. You can pay by coin or credit card at the machine. You can also call on your phone or use a phone app or a browser on your phone. And then finally, again, the base rate is 50 cents an hour. So that's where the rates would start. And they are adjusted 4 times a year based on demand analysis. So if the meters are working and there's enough availability, the rate won't change. If we're finding that even with parking meters, there's too much demand, then it might go up 25 cents. But everything will start at 50 cents an hour. A bit of detail on the residential permit parking is that is this area here, and it does go beyond the Northeast Mission project boundary, and that's because in consultation with the residential permit parking manager, program manager, we identified some more natural boundaries, and that is 13th and Division at the north, Valencia on the west, 21st Street on the south, and Potrero Avenue on the east. And so this area,
Mari?
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think
Please.
we may have our interpretation services crossed up.
Oh,
yeah, I was
let me
trying
pause.
to listen to Spanish and I was getting you. So I think my suggestion would be to turn off interpretation services and turn them back on.
Okay, let's wait and do that then.
Okay, interpretation services have been turned
Los
off,
servicios de interpretación se han apagado
and I'm going to turn them back on.
y los voy a volver a encender.
咁我哋而家咧就重新開始個開呢一個
Thank you.
Great. Should we do a test, or are we confident everything is running smoothly?
Please continue, and Andy and Pamela can double check that everything's working well. Okay,
great. I'm going to start over because I can't remember where I left off. The proposal is to create a new residential permit parking zone. And so that this boundary is beyond the Northeast Mission project area itself, because we wanted to use more natural boundaries. And so to the north, we have 13th and Division. On the west, we have Valencia. To the south, we have 21st Street. And on the east, we have Potrero Avenue. And so, as you can see, there's some overlap with an existing residential permit parking area. I, which is that orange color, and W, which is that brown color. And so they would be integrated into this new zone. It's a relatively seamless process at no cost. And I do want to be clear that while this is a new residential permit parking area, within this, there are standard time limits and standard parking meters. And so everyone, even if you have a GG, that would be the new zone that's created. That's the next in line in the letters. Even if you have a permit in this area, you would still, if you're at a standard meter or standard time limit, be required to pay the meter or move after that time limit. Within this area, if the block has that signage, except GG permits, then you get those benefits of a permit holder. I also want to mention that while the program title Residential Permit Parking suggests residents, it's actually more inclusive. So if you're a business, a caregiver, a teacher, active military, student, you may also be eligible for a permit. These are the kinds of signs that you would see for residential permit parking. So on the left-hand side, this would be the payer permit signage. So if you do not have a GG permit, you would have to, in this example, it's for Hayes Valley, so HV, but you would pay the parking meter. If you have that permit on a block with this type of signage, then you're exempt from that payment. On the right-hand side, that's a standard time limit residential permit parking sign, such that if you have the designated RPP permit, you are exempt from that time limit. I do want to point out on this particular sign is that it has two RPP residential permit parking areas. In this example, it's area Q and area HB. I'm going to go back a slide. This is the instance where you have two areas right next to each other. So if this new zone GG is created, for example, the boundary line at 21st Street would become a buffer. So 21st Street would have signage that would read 2-hour time limit, except permits GG and I, or GG and W. And that creates a little buffer space. So people with either of those permits can park along 21st. So this is the kind of signage that would be installed for residential permit parking. While we are talking a lot about parking, I do want to take some time to mention this is a very multimodal friendly area. There is transit coming through the neighborhood. there quite a bit of bike infrastructure, bike lanes, bike share stations. And then we have these vehicle share programs. One is car share, which is basically like renting a car. And the other is electric moped or e-moped. And if you're finding that you don't actually use your vehicle that much, it's a burden to find parking, it's expensive, and you don't need to have it full time, you might look into participating in car share or electric moped. And if you have, we have information on the SFMTA website, or you can email me directly and I'll send that information over to you. But I do want to make sure that while we're talking a lot about parking management tonight, that this area is rich with other modes of transport. So next steps, we are meeting this evening, and I look forward to your feedback, comments and questions, and we'll review that and we'll address it and integrate it as we can. And we'll be sure to put that in the meeting summary that we'll post on the project website next week. And then we will come back to the community and have a community meeting / public hearing, at which point, again, we will take public comment and feedback and questions and refine the proposal to make sure that we get as good a fit as possible. Again, we want these regulations to support the neighborhood. We don't want anyone to have to leave or think about you know, that these are the intent is to be very helpful and make sure that people have access to the curb. So we will integrate, address that feedback, and then we will go to our board, the Transportation Agency Board, and seek approval. So we haven't identified those dates yet. If we're able to have another meeting by the end of the year, that would be fantastic. And then we can go to the board early next year. So those are next steps. And now I want to open it up to public comment and questions. I'm going to quickly run through what you're seeing in front of you. When you are asking a question, please be sure to be in a quiet area so we can hear you clearly. If you're joining from a computer, there's a hand feature. And so if you click on that, you'll show up in our queue and we'll know to unmute you. And then you'll have to unmute yourself. There's a little microphone icon, pardon me. And to make sure that we can get to everyone's questions, there will be a 2-minute limit. So we'll let you know when 2 minutes up, and then we'll have to mute you because we do want to make sure we can get to everyone. If you're joining by phone, you'll dial *9. And again, that will put you in our queue. And so we can unmute you. And then again, you'll have to unmute yourself by dialing *6, and you'll have 2 minutes for comment. And if you're not able to or would prefer to send me a comment, you can do that in the chat, or you can email me directly to mari.hunter@sfmta.com. Again, MARI.HUNTER@sfmta.com. So with that, I'm going to go to our queue. Let's see here if I do this and attendees. We will start with Wendy. So I think I'll unmute you, and then you'll have two. Actually, let me quickly check. Andy, are you with us, or are you still in the other room?
I am with you.
Okay,
and I
wonderful.
have my official SFMTA egg timer handy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so Wendy, if you want to unmute yourself, then you'll have 2 minutes. It looks like you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. Wendy? Oh, I hear. Oh, and she's muted again.
So, can you hear me, Mari? This is Pamela.
Yep.
So I hear her in the Chinese. Like when I click on Chinese, I hear her.
Oh, thank you.
Why don't we
So-
turn off?
Yeah, let's turn off. Thank you.
唔好意思嚇，你就再重新講過啦，因為頭先咧你係講緊中文，但係因為我喺個中文嗰個嘅房入邊咧聽唔到你講嘢，咁你可唔可以重新講過 Wendy？
Se está escuchando ahora la intérprete de cantonés.
Irene, we've gone ahead and turned off interpretation services. Do you want to share what Wendy asked?
I could not hear her.
Okay.
I
La
wasn't able to
intérprete de
hear
cantonés no
her.
pudo escuchar lo que
I
Wendy
just
quería decirle.
translate and asked Wendy to repeat.
Lo único que hizo la intérprete fue pedirle a Wendy que repitiera su comentario para que la intérprete de
Wendy 唔
chino
好
a
意思，你
inglés.
聽唔聽到我哋講嘢啊？
All right, Wendy appears to be muted. So
Parece que Wendy está
嗱
todavía
，Wendy 唔好意思
silenciada.
咧，你如果可以取消靜音嘅話咧，咁你就可
La
以重新
intérprete
發
de
問。
cantonés está impartiéndole instrucciones.
So I would suggest that we reinstate interpretation services and
嗱，
move
咁我
on.
哋咧就重新開過呢一個嘅翻譯啦，咁然之後再繼續。如果你陣間需要再問問題咧，就再舉手。
So are we back in?
We are back
Translation.
in translation services.
Okay. So is Wendy able to communicate with Irene then?
No,
No.
I don't believe Wendy actually said anything.
Okay. I'm gonna just jot down her name, and then if we're not able to connect with her, we will email her directly and make sure that we get her question or feedback. In which case, I'm gonna move on to John. And Dovid, should I be doing this, or do you wanna?
It seems like you're comfortable doing it. I
Okay,
would
okay.
continue doing it.
All right, thanks. All right, John, I'm gonna, let's see here.
Hi.
Hi, and okay, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, great. This is John.
Sorry, John, one sec.
I think that was my fault. I was
Oh.
disabling Wendy, and I think you were doing it at the same time.
Ah. All right, John, 1 second. We're gonna restart your 2 minutes. Unmute. Okay. Let's try again. Go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you, Mari, for leading this meeting. I had emailed you back in December of last year about extending the RPP process in my neighborhood. I'm actually the block captain of our group here of Shotwell between 14th and 16th, 15th between South Venice and Folsom. In the 16 years that I've lived here, I've seen things get much more challenging for parking. There are 3 big apartment buildings. Casa Adelante at 990 Folsom, 143 units. Avanza down the 2 blocks down, 17th and Shotwell, 80 units. Casa Adelante on Van Ness, Avanza 490 Van Ness. Anyway, it's a total of 318 units with 0 parking. And so I'm just wondering if you've taken that into consideration, as well as the influx of homeless that are sleeping in their cars or RVs in this area. I'm kind of curious if that was part of the study. And then I'm also wondering, I would have loved to have been part of the working group, but I did not know about it. Hopefully I can become part of the next one. I think you mentioned a little bit about next steps, and I just would like to see something happen as soon as possible. So that's my
Great.
2 minutes.
Thanks, John. Well, I'll start with your comment about lots of development, and that is accurate. All the more reason to have parking regulations. There's already a lot of demand, and it's only going to increase. And so, as I mentioned at the very beginning, much of this neighborhood, the Northeast Mission, is unregulated. So we're going from 0 to 60. And that in itself is going to change parking behavior a lot. We find that people don't like tickets. They're going to move along. So people who have had a vehicle and parked it there basically until they're street cleaning are going to have more reason to move if they have a residential permit. There is a cap, and so if people are happen to have 4, 5, 6 cars, that's no longer going to be an option. This again is really to inspire taking turns at the curb. It's going to look different for different groups. But again, we're going from 0 to 60 in terms of how parking is managed in this neighborhood. And so it will help to mitigate some of the new demands that are coming in with the development. As far as encampments, again, this is unregulated. There really hasn't been much need for parking enforcement to come through here except for street cleaning. So again, that in itself will inspire turnover and people to move along looking for other free unregulated parking. So yes, I think that these regulations in and of themselves will generate that turnover and curb availability. As far as the working group is concerned, we're happy to have you join us when the next one is scheduled, which will be reviewing feedback and questions from this meeting. We'll post that online, and people are welcome to join that. So if you're on our listserv, you will get that information.
Mari?
Yes.
Before you take the next question, I did see a question in the Q&A about how the selection of the next caller and what they do. So I thought I would just remind people that when you raise your hand and Mari selects you, she allows you to unmute, but then she will kind of remind you, because you are the only one that can unmute yourself. We're not spying on you, right? You have to actively unmute yourself. So that mute button, I think, does appear when you have the opportunity to speak.
Great, thank you. I'll go to the next person in the queue, Calvin Roberts, allowed to talk.
Yeah, hi, I'm Calvin Roberts. I'm more than a 50-year veteran in the neighborhood. I have a business and I also live along the area boundaries, Mariposa and Hampshire. My concern is that I don't think your study has really touched with a lot of the people who require access to the parking in the neighborhood. In particular, the muni operators, the drivers, they don't have contracted to park within the facility. They often park in our neighborhood. We have no problem with that. And also a lot of employees from the general hospital, because the general hospital garage fills up and people fill up the garage and then take the shuttle to their bus, their other places like Parnassus Hospital, because this one over here is the cheapest in the area. My concern is that I understand the importance of trying to figure out something with the parking, but I think that one of the reasons why we have the serious parking is because of the inadequacies of the transportation system. And if that would be addressed from the people that I've spoken to, they wouldn't have to drive down here and park. So my concern again is that I don't think you're communicating with other people who need to know what's happening. A lot of these people may show up and suddenly realize that they can't park and go to work. And there's other businesses here that also require more than 4-hour parking with activities that are conducted within their facilities and within their buildings. So I'm kind of concerned about this particular area, and the general feeling that we've always had in the past is that we've been able to coexist and live with this problem, and that we should just try to continue to do that.
Thank you. So regarding your comment about the, transit, coming from the MTA, we have had meetings with the Flynn Division, Potrero Division, to make sure that we are advancing regulations that work for our operators and maintenance staff. And it's something that we've done at other divisions, whether it's up in Fisherman's Wharf, as you might imagine, that entire area is covered with parking meters already. More recently, in the Dog Patch neighborhood. And so as far as the hospital is concerned, we have been in touch with, General Hospital and UCSF. And that is something that we're actually trying to tackle, this like commuter parking, that we have some great transit lines going through here, whether it's BART or rapid lines, lots of improvements along 16th and that transit. So people will park and maybe hop on a bus or a train. So it is, we do need to tackle both, which is improving our multimodal system as well as parking curb management. And that's what's nice about the MTAs. We're all under one roof. And so we are trying to do both, but major improvements to transit take a long time. And we do want to make sure that we're tackling some of the more immediate issues. Again, we have been trying to do this for over 10 years. And so we have been asked directly from the community, please advance some parking regulations here to help alleviate some of the stress on the curb. So thank you for that feedback. We will continue to connect with businesses as much as possible. And if there are groups that you know of, please email them directly to me. We absolutely want to make contact and ensure that we're providing all this information. Thank you. I'm going to go on to the next person. I have Daryl.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, about 2 minutes starting.
Yes.
My name is Daryl Williams. I have a business in exactly the same building that Calvin Roberts does, strangely enough. He's my neighbor, literally next door down. I have a business in the same building called Strobe Space, and it's a rental studio and meeting space for people to hold executive meetings, corporate meetings. And also, again, it's a photo studio, so people do photo shoots, commercial photo shoots and whatnot. And this regulation is now being proposed, I think is going to destroy my business because I have clients that come that have 4-hour, 6-hour, maybe even 8-hour photo shoots. And they come into the area and they'll have a crew. They'll have 4 or 5 people in the crew. Or I'll have these corporate meetings where people, need to park for 4, 5, 6 hours. And as I see it now, I think that this, to put it quite bluntly, I think this kind of regulation is going to destroy my business. And I really don't have anything else to say other than that. I'm very concerned.
Okay. I'm gonna thank you for that feedback. And we have had people have expressed that concern of I need to be here for more than 2 hours or 4 hours, those time limits, which is why the parking meters don't have time limits for the most part. So, and why we're also starting at 50 cents an hour. Again, going from 0 to 60 with parking regulations is going to make a huge difference. And so we are optimistic that there will be space, and therefore when your clients come to your business or any business that requires more than a nearby time limit of, again, either 2 or 4 hours, that a parking meter that doesn't have a time limit will create that flexibility. So if for example, your photo shoot takes 5 or 6 hours, your clients will be able to do that and park without being concerned that they might receive a ticket. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next person in the queue. We've got Jackie. Let me unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name's Jackie. I live on York at 20th Street. I've been living here for over 12 years. The neighborhood has never created parking problems for my family or our neighbors in all of that time. I sometimes have to park as far as 4 blocks away. That being said, some of the areas where we park are now listed as being blue for paid parking in areas that have never been congested. I'm specifically looking at Hampshire over by Franklin Square, and also the block before that, so over by Mariposa and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to why those are being put in as paid parking, given the fact that they've never had congestion problems. I'm also would like to mention what the first person mentioned, which is that the spaces that are being taken up are often by vehicles that are there either for, are not moving, RVs and other types of things. While there is no regulation on some of those streets right now, there is the base regulation that cars can't be there, I believe, for 48 or 72 hours. And I'm not seeing any enforcement on that. And so I would like to have that addressed too, because I feel like the 0 to 60 might be because we're not taking the steps that we could take right now to try and, dampen any problems that the neighborhood's having. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. So some of the areas that you mentioned receiving that are proposed to have paid parking are because of the commercial neighborhood employment type as opposed to residential. And as far as the vehicles that are not moving, it sounds like it's possible that they're being used for shelter. The board's practice right now is that there's a lot of leniency around the vehicularly housed, and that is not just unique to Northeast Mission, is a citywide issue and something that we are working in. It's not just MTA that's involved. There are several agencies as a coordinated effort to try and come up with a more comprehensive solution. And so the 72 hours that you mentioned, yes, that is a regulation in place that actually gets reset literally if someone moves it just a few feet. And that's just how that regulation works. And so it doesn't actually take much to overcome that threshold of 72 hours and moving. So again, any regulations that we put in will really help to move things along. And we also want to make sure that we're being equitable and that everyone has some version of turn taking. And so that is part of that equation. Thank you. I'm going to go to John. Let me just unmute you.
All right.
Hi.
Hi. been to all your meetings, Mari. Thank you so very much for doing this public outreach. I want to say two things. First of all, I've lived here for 30 years, and I've noticed this neighborhood is self-regulating. Whatever changes come in, people end up dealing with it. And lately, it's actually gotten a lot easier to park. The second thing is like we began this particular process about 2 years ago, I believe. In the intervening time, the pandemic has come in and things have changed a lot. The initial parking surveys that you did, talking about what the demand was for spaces, has changed. You know, for instance, in my particular blocks that I live in, we've gotten 2 block-long loading zones that, and we've gotten a parklet. And, you know, we've adapted to that, you know, but that's changed, you know, like the demand for parking spaces that you're talking about. So I'm looking at this plan, and I remember, you know, when we first started on this, the data we were looking at has changed. Is there any plan to, you know, like reassess what's going on? Because I'm not so sure that we need this anymore, or this, you know, this level of detail.
Thanks, John. Yes, certainly. I think all of us can probably remember at the very start of the pandemic, there was no traffic. A lot of people were moving out of the city. But as we've seen in the last year, things are rebounding, which is nice to see. You know, people are going back to work, having to go back to work, at least part-time. And so I was just out there. Some of the photos that were in the presentation earlier are literally just from last week, and it was entirely parked up. And yes, different times of day. And that was something we saw in the data, that during the day, things are very congested. During the evenings, it's really not so bad, which is why those core hours of operations are a 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Just to deal with when things are most congested. Those are, you know, my observations. We didn't do a full-scale data analysis, you know, in the last couple months, like we did the first time around 10 years ago and 2-3 years ago. But I am also getting comments from the community saying, when are we going to do this? We need this, we need this. So there are definitely differing opinions of whether it's we don't need it or we'll just deal with it. And then people saying, we don't want to just deal with it. We want to do something. And again, we want to find regulations that work for the various needs of the community. And that's why it's so colorful. And we're trying to have a very tailored approach. So thank you. I'm going to go to the next person in the queue. Coco.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I live at 15th and Folsom, and I can see how on the map the designations like around UCSF, around the Muni building are all blue, paid parking, their businesses. And my concern is a little bit that if it's block by block and kind of, this is a residential block, this is a business block, but I mean, that's pretty much where I'm always parking, are in those blue zones, because my block itself is mostly driveways. So I'm wondering, and UCSF like has half of that block is a parking lot. So is it necessary for businesses to have that large of the paid parking zones, or could some of those what are currently blue zones become the green or orange? Thank you.
Sure. Let me update this. So what we typically try to do is match the most immediate land use frontage with the regulation. Certainly this is a draft proposal, and we'll be looking at this again to make some tweaks. But as you might imagine, in an urban area, which this is in a developing area, it's maybe not likely to get the spot right in front of you. You might, and from your description, it sounds like there are lots of curb cuts for driveways. And so you're already having to park half a block or across the street or around the block. And so I do want to manage expectations that even though we expect parking behaviors to change quite a bit and therefore create more availability, people will still probably have to walk a little bit. But again, we'll examine, you mentioned 15th and Folsom, and we'll be looking in other locations that people have identified just to make sure that we have a good balance. Recognizing that during the day, daytime population might look a little different than, say, the evening population. Again, these regulations all terminate at 6 p.m. So we want to make sure that we have the daytime demands well balanced. Thank you. Calvin Roberts, let me unmute you.
I had another comment. I heard you mention this fact about the leniency on the part of the citations with vehicles. We've been having a big problem around the Muni barn, the Potrero yard, because of the parking enforcement officers. We've documented them on the street sweeping nights. Sometimes they're issuing tickets on the Muni side for driveways where none exist. And they're also not writing tickets for occupied vehicles, but they're writing tickets for any other vehicles on the blocks that are unoccupied. So, and we feel strongly that that's illegal, that they would arbitrarily decide on who gets a ticket and who does not on a block that should be liable for a ticket because of street sweeping. And we would hope that you would try to address that. And the other problem that we've had, we've had 4 fires in the last month and a half in the neighborhood. One, in fact, affected the wall of Muni. I'm sure you heard about that. The transformer blew out. And the tents that were pushed on the west side of the street were forced to move, but they moved over to the east side on the corner of 17th and Hampshire. And we've had to walk people in wheelchairs into the street to get around those tents because they occupy the complete sidewalk. And we've had no response from the city to rectify this. We can't get these people to move their tents back a little bit so people can pass by. And we've had a number of times where people have actually pulled needles on us when we try to talk to them about these issues. So since you're part of SFMTA, we would hope that you, recognizing that this is happening, would try to move forward and get some people to move on this, because this is a real problem and somebody's going to get hurt.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. So yes, encampments, and until now we've been talking about maybe people sheltering in vehicles in their on the street, but there are encampments on the sidewalk as well, and that again is a coordinated effort. I will. We work closely, obviously, with enforcement, and they have been part of actually this process for the Northeast Mission. So I will be sure to flag that, and the sidewalk encampments. We'll make a note of that because we do coordinate those efforts with the supportive services and police department, because it is scary if you run into situations where there's confrontation. So thank you for bringing that up, and we'll be sure to connect with enforcement on that. I have another question from Daryl, and then I might move over to the Q&A. And then we have another one from John. So Daryl, you're unmuted.
Okay, hi. Thank you. I just want to echo what my name is Daryl Burton. I'm on Hampshire Street, and I just want to echo what the last gentleman said. This is a big problem with these tents, and sometimes they're blocking the cutaway where people, especially seniors, they don't even have to be in wheelchairs, or people are trying to navigate taking their kids to school in the morning up to the buses, and I think that's a big problem. I don't and I know this is about parking, but I'm curious about if you could answer the issue of speed bumps and if that's outside your lane, or because it's a real big problem on Hampshire's racing cars spinning in the intersection, and that may not be part of this discussion, but I just wanted to put it out there.
Sure. So I don't personally work on speed bumps, speed humps, or speed tables, but our Livable Streets division within the agency does. And if you want to email me directly, I can send you the link. Communities, people are allowed to request speed humps. So if speeding's a problem along your street or corridor, and you submit a request, that will become part of the review. So you can find it on the MTA website, but if you're having trouble, feel free to email me directly and I will pass along that information. I have a hand up from John.
Hey, Mari, I just had a question. Implementation. Are we talking about putting in kiosks for the meters, and what's the other? And license plate readers for the RPP. What's the implementation that we're talking about doing in this area?
Great. I'm so pleased you brought that up. So the pay stations, yes, we have flagged that for our meter shop. That feedback has come back before, that ideally we have pay stations instead of single space meters, just to reduce the amount of infrastructure that's on the sidewalk. And they have prioritized pay stations for this area. There may be locations where single space meters are required just because of a sub sidewalk infrastructure, or just the nature of the specific conditions, but confirming that pay stations have been identified for this area. Regarding license plate recognition, yes. And two things to mention about that is that license plate recognition, meaning the parking control officers have this device and it reads a license plate, and it just indicates we've seen this license plate. If it's a time limited area, it's been here for 12 hours. So obviously it's exceeded the 2 or 4 hour time limit. The other nice thing about license plate recognition is that it means that we will no longer have physical stickers for residential permit parking. So it'll be all virtual. By the time, again, if this gets approved and full implementation, the city will be entirely virtual as it relates to residential permit parking. And so people don't have to worry about a sticker being scraped off. It will simply be associated with your license plate. So thank you for that question. Moving on to EH.
Hi, my name is Eva. I am a worker at a retail business on Folsom near 14th, and I just wanted to bring up an issue that I thought wasn't really getting addressed since somebody brought up equity, and that is the financial impact that these regulations could potentially have on working class folks, particularly for people who have to drive to commute because of public transportation limits. My business has about 200 workers who are not on site at all times. However, just adding up the costs of having to pay in the least 50 cents an hour per day for an 8-hour workday. If somebody works 5 days a week, that amounts to about $1,000 a year. And that's without the price of a ticket. And with the price of a ticket, the price of a ticket could basically equal somebody's working income for an entire day of work. So I feel like implementing these parking changes could have a really significant financial impact on people who are already vulnerable. And I really would like to see this addressed. You know, a lot of people used to live in that very community who had to move away because of rising costs. I myself have worked in that neighborhood for over 20 years and also have had to move away because of rising costs. And I feel like this is just squeezing the very people who are most vulnerable. So I would really like to have that taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva. Appreciate that feedback. And yes, that is the equity component and affordability, I should say, component of parking regulations is you know, part of the discussion, to be sure. And it's something that we've seen as other neighborhoods have been developed, and therefore regulations have been needed. For example, Dogpatch. We actually just had a site visit with one of the major companies over there, and if it helps, they have shared that the continued provision of free 4-hour parking has helped a lot. And so, you know, all of the orange that you're seeing and yellow in this plan allows for that, recognizing that while 50 cents is our base rate, it does add up. And if their shift is literally that entire 9 to 6 p.m., that, like I said, it does add up. But continuing to offer a lot of free 4-hour parking in the area does provide some relief. And we do try to make it as easy as possible if you are at a parking meter and you do need to pay either through parking cards, which is something that, you know, if the business is able to provide those, they can be pre-purchased and provided to employees. Or if employees are paying themselves, you can actually prepay the meter. So for example, if your shift is 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., 10 a.m. Up until 9, it's free, but then you have to pay for that 1 hour from 9 to 10. You can actually prepay the meter. And so you don't risk getting a citation there. So thank you for that. The next person, Spirulina, I'm gonna unmute you. Spirulina?
Hi, that's me.
Hi.
So thank you for having this forum to hear our local voices in this matter. I've been a resident on 15th Street near Folsom for over 20 years now. And I've seen a lot of changes in the parking. There was a lot of parking when I first moved here, and then there wasn't much parking. And now it's getting challenging to park again. And what I'm seeing is with that huge blue area of paid parking that you've put around all of the places, ironically, that really already have a big parking lot. So you've got a big blue area around UCSF. They have a huge parking lot that's usually mostly empty. There's blue areas up and down Folsom Street near where there's already parking. There's already plenty of parking for the Pound. There's already plenty of parking for Best Buy. Rainbow Grocery has their own parking lot. I just don't understand why all of that's paid parking. That doesn't make any sense to me. And for people, there are actually still plenty of people in this neighborhood who use their cars to work, people who do catering, people who work as theater professionals, people who work with childcare, people who work doing all kinds of things where they have to use their car and come and go during the day. So I'd love it if that didn't all become paid parking. It would really change a lot of people's accessibility to just being able to make it in this neighborhood. So I don't know why it all has to be paid parking, that there's already plenty of parking for those businesses. And that's good for me. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Again, I've made a note of some of the locations you identified, so we'll be sure to revisit those. But again, I do want to reiterate, trying to match as much as possible the balance. A lot of people coming in during the day and the various business needs. Yes, there are a number of off-street lots in the area, and yet it's still very, very parked up during the day. And so the parking meters, frankly, are our most efficient tool to create that turnover and availability. It's the most, like I said, efficient and reliable way to do that. And so the blue standard, just blue alone, is actually relatively limited in this area. And again, it's those places that are just entirely, those areas are entirely commercial office kinds of things. And so we do want to sprinkle in some of those standard meters just because, again, they are so efficient in creating some of that turnover. So thank you for that, though. I'm going to, we don't have any more hands up. And so I'm going to switch over to see if questions have come up in the queue that we haven't already answered. Although I might ask if Andy has been watching
thanks,
this,
Mari.
and if there's anything I should flag or identify.
I've been lurking here with my egg timer, and everyone was so succinct that we didn't ever get the egg timer going. So I'll contribute here. Early on, Daryl, we've had 2 Daryls at the meeting at least. There may be more, but Daryl with a Y noted early on in reaction to something we were talking about, parking and the campers. And I think we've talked about that already. And John Lutz also, I think, said this one out loud about parking enforcement around 1800 Bryant, where there haven't been regulations, and how is that going to work? And I think we did talk about that. JG, please clarify that no time limit means the parkers can feed the meter indefinitely, that is all day, or even over many days in succession, like camper van encampments. So no time limit on a parking meter does mean you do have to keep plugging it. It's not like you get to sit there forever. And as Mari said, not to take over the policy conversation, but in a lot of analysis of time limits on parking meters, what we found is that people didn't necessarily buy the whole day of parking. They just bought what they needed. And it can be pretty expensive if you want to be there all day or all week. And so what we found, frankly, is to ask someone to pay anything means that they think about it, and they tend to just use what they need. And Mari could elaborate on that. John Lutz, thank you for your efforts in presentation. Thank you, John. And Daryl with a Y, looking for Mari's email address, and I'll point that out to everybody. It's at the bottom of the slide that's on the screen. And if you don't have a visual on that, it's just Mari's name, mari.hunter@sfmta.com. And then finally, Mark brings in that that's already in our neighborhood and it doesn't work. License plate recognition, that is. And I'll just comment that, yes, license plate recognition is a technology that's been in use all across the country for several years. Like a lot of tech, it started out okay, and it's gotten better. It's getting better and better the more that it is refined. And right now, resident permit parking in a lot of neighborhoods is effectively being enforced by license plate recognition. And where there is some hiccup or some ambiguity, the parking control officer can stop and look at things up close with his or her eyes. But you can imagine if you can look at 100 cars and you have to check 1 or 2 of them in person, that's much more efficient, and it lets the enforcement tie in with other things. For instance, if you pay by license plate, it can tell you that car has paid the meter. If it has a valid resident permit, it can tell you that car has a permit, no problem. And one of the very handy things is it can tell you whether that car is stolen. It's a very successful way of finding and reuniting stolen cars. So license plate recognition, still newish technology, but it's getting better every day. And there's going to be more and more of the work that the MTA does to manage the streets that goes through license plate recognition. And Spirulina has rung in. Is there going to be enough permit parking for residents to park? It doesn't look like it. So I'll just leave it at that. Mari, is there going to be enough permit parking for residents?
Thank you. Yes. So how the residential permit parking works is there is a cap. And so it's a cap of 2, presuming there are for residents for 2 registered vehicles at that address for 2 licensed drivers. And so as we have heard, I have not confirmed this myself, that and again, not unique to Northeast Mission, we've seen this in other places where we have instituted residential permit parking. A resident may have 6, 7 cars that they were wanting to park on the street and leave them there forever and ever. And this will start to curb that type of situation. And so once we have regulations in place, we do find that creates availability for permit holders. We have a lot of new hands that just popped up, so I'm going to start with Anne. Anne?
Hi, thanks. Hi. I was wondering, I've been walking around the neighborhood every morning, and there's so much empty streetscape spaces, and I wonder how you were talking about the curbs, the loading, and such and such. I mean, how is that going to be determined? How will those be marked? And will it happen at the request of the business, or is it part of a plan, or what?
Sure, great question. So loading zones can be installed in 2 ways. One is by a business. So again, on our agency website, you can go to the Color Curb program, and a business can apply for a commercial loading zone or passenger loading zone, depending on their needs. It's also something that the city can initiate if a business is too busy to realize that they need more loading space, so they don't have to double park. That is something that the city might, and what comes to mind is along specifically, it's things that we notice very quickly, is along transit corridors. If they're double parking and our transit operators are having to go around double parked vehicles, we definitely want to avoid that because that's a huge maneuver for a transit vehicle to be going around double parked cars. So that can happen in 2 ways. Again, a business can request it, or we can initiate it. And they are marked with signs, as well as painting the curb. So for example, a commercial loading zone is painted yellow. Thank you. Next person. Sorry, let me quickly lower your hand, Anne. Monica? Oh, I
Yep.
think I hit 2
Thanks.
people. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, this is Monica, who's on the community committee for this. One of the things that still has me concerned is to what degree the rapid pace of development in certain parts of the Mission, especially kind of the Potrero side of things, is going to be able to accommodate the plan as written, and to what degree, by the time this plan gets approved or goes through all the levers, does it need to then need to accommodate all that new development? I just drove by Bryant and the overpass there, and a huge building looks like it's going up, and I don't know if it's housing or what, but rapid changes are happening. I'm just wondering about how that's factoring into planning.
Great, thank you. So as it relates to development, I think I want to answer this in two ways. One is that we'd like to, again, once we have a proposal that we feel comfortable with, going to our board, advance it, approve it, and get it implemented as quickly as possible. And as quickly as possible means everything that you're seeing has to be officially surveyed to make sure that we have the right dimensions, and we're, for example, making sure that when we put in paid parking, we aren't putting a space in front of a fire hydrant or something. So there is quite a bit of work to prepare for implementation, and then it's the implementation itself, which does take time. As you can see, there are hundreds of block faces, which means a lot of signage that has to be created specific for this neighborhood, particularly for residential permit parking. They are unique. This new zone, for example, would be called GG. So we can't just take a Hayes Valley sign and put it there. It has to have the right signage. So it does take a while to implement. And so, yes, it's very likely that something's going to open up in the period of time between an approval and implementation. But all the more reason, really, again, if we have a plan that we can confidently go to our board with, advance, because when new folks are coming to the Northeast Mission, we want to manage their expectations about how they're using this curb space. Again, it's shared public right of way. We all have to take turns. And so when they come to the neighborhood, they will know that it's either already in place, depending on when they come in, or they know that, in the not too distant future, this is going to be managed parking. So I'm not going to move into the neighborhood with my 4 cars and park them on the street. I'm going to be very thoughtful about how I want to be in this space and travel about. So, but that's just speaking to development and timeline. It will take months and months to implement, just because of the size and scope of this proposal. Thank you. I have another question from Daryl. Let me unmute you. Daryl? Oh, let's see here. Unmute. Daryl? Why is that working?
Daryl, if you're trying to speak, a reminder that you have to unmute yourself. Mari is just giving you permission to speak.
Is that working? Did I not do it right, David?
No, you did it fine.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Maybe Daryl is no longer here or intending to speak.
All right, Daryl, I'm gonna lower your hand. We'll try again. I have a few more hands, but we'll circle back. Please re-raise your hand if you'd like to speak. John?
Hey, Mari. He brought up a good point. You guys need to do a new survey of that neighborhood. It's changed. It's like the solutions I'm seeing here are what we started talking about in the beginning, and things are different now. So do you have any plans to resurvey the area?
In short, no, we were not planning to do a full-scale data analysis with collection of parking occupancy. And we can certainly do some sample blocks, and that would not take up too much time. But in my observations, as well as your neighbors providing feedback about conditions, it is parked up. And again, there is a lot of development coming in. And so while there may be some areas that are a little bit open, and that's probably not going to be the case much longer. And I also want to make sure that we're clear about daytime regulations, the difference between early in the morning or late at night. Just making sure that we're able to create some of that turnover when it's busiest, when residents are parking with their permits, as well as the influx of daytime visitors, customers, employees. So we can definitely look into a few sample blocks though, just to make sure that we're on the same page. Thank you. I'm going to switch to Kelvin. Kelvin?
Hi, I just had a call from someone who asked me to raise this question. They're not online. They have a small business within the area of the study, and they were concerned. They said, if RPPs are being issued, does a business within a building have access to the RPP? And how many, if there's numerous businesses within a building, do they all have access to it, or would only one be issued if it was issued at all?
Great question. So businesses are eligible for residential permits, permit parking. And how it works is if there's a unique address for the business, they are allowed to, or they're eligible for one permit for a personal vehicle. And then if they have any commercial vehicles registered to that business, it's up to 3 permits. Thank you. I don't see any other hands up. Andy, how are we doing in the Q&A feed?
We've had a couple of more Q&As. Ann C. Notes that the vision program, I think daylighting, intersection daylighting, removes equivalent to 4 spaces per block. That's a large reduction in spaces, especially on our tiny half blocks in the area. How much footage is removed per block face with daylighting?
It's a great question. So again, the focus is at the approach of an intersection. So actually, let me toggle back to that image of the daylighting. So sorry, I have a few pop-up windows for the chat. Let me just move that aside. So this particular example is a one-way street. So you're seeing the vehicle come down, and we had parking on both sides. And so you're seeing about 20 feet, those red lines. Oh, maybe that's a little more. It's about 20 feet is a rule of thumb to create that visibility. And we just want to make sure that we have that cone of vision. So again, drivers can see people crossing, cyclists can see people crossing with sufficient time. If they need to stop immediately, it's going to be a lot more successful if they can see them well in advance. So that's how daylighting works, is that you create that clearance. Again, it's about 20 feet, which is about a car length at the approach of an intersection. So this particular drawing shows 2 approaches, but if you're thinking of a 2-way street, it would be the approach on one side and then approach on the other side. So it would be a total of 40 feet, 20 feet on in one direction, and on the other side, 20 feet. Thank you.
All right, and one more from the Q&A. Anonymous attendee. Can SFMTA address the rampant and unsafe double parking on 16th Street between Folsom to Market? Can there be double fines or something?
Thank you. I will certainly bring this to the attention of enforcement. particularly 16th Street is a really critical transit corridor. And so we want to make sure that we don't have double parking and jeopardize, well, anyone's safety having to swerve around. And actually, I will pull up another photo. Let me go up 1, 2. This photo in the lower left-hand corner is 16th Street, and that's an oncoming vehicle that has had to cross over and is basically going head-on with the USPS, the Postal Service truck. I've been asked to be deputized from enforcement. I'm still waiting for my request to be approved, but those are the types of situations we want to avoid, and that with parking regulations, we create that availability, or if we need loading zones, because I was there, I can share that the second vehicle behind was actually doing loading. And so those kinds of things that we would layer in, commercial loading, for example, so we avoid those double parking situations. But I'll definitely bring it up with enforcement to pay attention to 16th Street in that area.
And Mari, I'll pipe up from the back room. This is Andy again. 16th Street has had some pretty important improvements for transit to make it really move well and get people across town. And you may know that by law, we, Muni, and other transit operators are able to do camera enforcement from buses if this vehicle parked in a transit way. So certainly if anybody is double parked in one of the red lanes on 16th, and I think there may even be some cases where it doesn't have to be a red lane, but the good news is, unless you're breaking the law, the Muni bus might send you a ticket. So pay attention to that. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you. We have a hand up from Daryl. Let me unmute you. Daryl?
Yeah, hi, I've got a question. This may be more rhetorical and it may be fruitless, but I'm a little curious about what is driving this new daylight consideration at the corners. I mean, I know that what's driving it is pedestrian safety, but I'm wondering what regulatory measures are driving this change.
Thank you. So daylighting is a tool that we've had for a while, and it was became much more visible and socialized with the city's Vision Zero policy. And for those not familiar, it's the city's commitment to eliminating traffic fatalities. And so this is a relatively inexpensive and efficient tool. I mean, it's just red paint at the approach of an intersection to make sure that we don't have a big vehicle blocking that visibility of pedestrians, and vice versa, that you know, the big vehicle isn't blocking the car for pedestrians to see, and they're having to like duck around to see if a vehicle is coming. So this is not unique to Northeast Mission. It's something that's been done citywide. Some of you may even remember a whole project exclusively daylighting in the Tenderloin neighborhood years ago. I want to say 2016, 2017. And so we are systematically going across the city and daylighting intersections to make sure that they are safer for people. Thank you. Calvin, let me unmute you. Okay.
Another call from some seniors, and they wanted me to raise this question. It's not exactly about the parking, but it's in regards to SFMTA. You've removed a stop at Harrison and 16th Street. There's 4 bus lines that used to use that stop. Now the only stop is between 16th and Bryant and 16th and Folsom, and a lot of seniors go to Gus's and other places down there. and they don't have any access. They've completely taken away the Harrison Street stop on both sides of the street. And a lot of elderly I know are asking why.
I will have to follow up with you. I'm not as familiar with the bus stop removal at Harrison and 16th. I know that the transit division has been doing a lot of work to make improvements, and that does sometimes mean adjusting transit stops. So if you could contact me directly, I can follow up with that information if you email me. But I've made a note here, Harrison and 16th bus stop. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any new hands. I think we've answered everything in the queue. So let me do a time check. We still have a few minutes. The meeting, oh, no, we have one more. Coco, let me unmute you. Coco?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for the information, and I'm wondering, how are you going to share these slides, and also how do people get on the list? Someone just told me about this meeting, and I live in the neighborhood and park in the neighborhood, and so yeah, what's the best way for residents around here to know what's going on?
Great. Yes, the slides and the video recording will be made available along with kind of a summary of questions that we've received. I've also received some via email recently, and we'll be sure to put that all together. And we'll be posting that early next week. As far as getting on the listserv, I'm glad, word of mouth is a fantastic way, and that way you were able to join us this evening. And so we definitely want to make sure that you're on the listserv. If you go to the project page and you go to sfmta.com and the Northeast Mission Parking Management Project, actually, I am really frustrated with myself that I didn't actually put that on this slide, on our closing slide, but you can sign up for the listserv. And in fact, if you email me at mari.hunter@sfmta.com, I'll be sure that you're on the listserv. But you can also go to the project page and very easily sign up
And
there.
Just to interject, the short URL for the parking is sfmta.com/mission parking, and that will get you to the Northeast Mission parking page to sign up.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And then I've got a question from Al. Let me unmute you. Hi, Al.
Hi, good morning. This is Alfredo. How are you? So people keep on talking about this area constantly redeveloping and changing. And I know we've talked about dead driveways. Can you explain a little bit to the community about the dead driveway topics we've been talking about?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. So dead driveways. There are lots of curb cuts in the neighborhood. Some of them are active and they lead to private driveways or commercial driveways, parking lots, whereas other curb cuts are just historic and they no longer lead to active off-street space. Through this process, we can identify, and the working group and some members of the public from previous meetings have submitted locations where there are dead driveways. And so through this process, we can designate them officially as dead driveways, meaning that can now become parkable space. Right now, you cannot park in a curb cut, specifically a private curb cut if it's not yours. And so if we're able to confirm that it is in fact a dead driveway no longer leading to off-street parking, then it can become part of parkable space. So we are actually looking to add a few spaces just through that process. Thank you for mentioning that.
And Mari, Andy piping up again, unbidden, but still barging in. And I don't want to overstep your authority, but I would like to deputize anybody on this call to be on the lookout.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, Al, you probably know some suspect driveways that you'd like us to take a look at, but anybody on the call or anybody that you know, if you say, yeah, there's a driveway here and it's not being used anymore. In fact, people are storing stuff in it. Well, let us know about that. You don't have to wait for this plan to be adopted. And I'd say it's the same thing is true for loading zones. If you have your eye on a yellow zone that seems to be defunct, doesn't really serve any business purposes, don't wait. Just let us know and we'll go take a look at it. And it may be that can come back as general parking. And that invitation stands. We rely on folks to be our eyes. And so you may already have your own list of dead driveways that you want to turn in. Let us know.
Yes, and we have a running list, so we're happy to add to it. Okay. Any other? We still have a few minutes. I want to make sure that we continue to create space. Spirulina, thank you. We will add it. Appreciate it. Well, if there are no other questions, comments, we can wrap up early. I really appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to quickly scroll down to that last slide to provide my email again. If something comes up, you want to be directed to another resource, please email me. Tell your friends and neighbors and colleagues. Again, we will send a follow-up communication to the listserv when we post everything on the website from this meeting, including the slides and this recording, and a summary of the questions and feedback we've received.
Thank you, Mari. And I'd like to thank Irene, Inez, and Jose for providing our translation services this evening.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, I think we'll call it an evening then. Appreciate your time immensely, and we hope to connect in the near future and continue to work on a proposal that will work for the Northeast Mission. Have a good night.
Good night.
Gracias por su sintonía.
Oh, here.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night. Thank you so
Good night,
much.
everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Good night.
See you soon.
Good night.
Sounds
Bye.
good.